Good day, everyone. I am Prisma Joy Paula Miguel. Today, I will be discussing about the physiology of speech. Speech requires movement of sound waves through the air. Speech itself is air that is moved from the lungs through a series of anatomic structures that mold sound waves into intelligible speech. This capacity can be accomplished in any volume, from a soft whisper to a loud shout, by varying the force and volume of air expelled from the lungs. All languages are spoken by the same mechanism, though the words are different and require different usages of the anatomy. Here are the parts of the vocal organs responsible for the speech production. Hard palate, soft palate, pharyngeal cavity, larynx, esophagus, nasal cavity, nostril, lip, tongue, teeth, oral cavity, jaw, trachea, lung, and diaphragm. The first one is the hard palate. The hard palate is the horizontal bony plate that makes a subsection of the palate of the mouth. It makes the anterior two-thirds of the roof of the oral cavity. The hard palate is made of two facial bones, palatine process of the maxilla and paired palatine bones. It contains several landmarks such as the incisive foramen and greater and lesser palatine foramina. They serve as passageway for the neurovascular structures intended for the supply of the oral cavity structures. The objective of the hard palate is both feeding and speech. Before modern surgeries were developed, infants with defective palates couldn't suckle and would often die. It is used to create a vacuum which forces the liquid into the mouth so that it can be ingested. It is also essential along with the tongue to create certain phonetic sounds. When a person has a cleft palate, for example, they are either unable to pronounce these sounds or they do not do but with a distinct nasal vibration, which makes their diction very unclear. Now is the soft palate. The soft palate, also known as velum, is a mobile fold of soft tissue attached to the posterior margin of the hard palate. It extends posterior inferiorly, being leveled with the border between the nasopharynx and oropharynx. Unlike the hard palate, the soft palate doesn't contain a bony framework. Rather, it consists of aponeurotic and muscular tissue. Moreover, the soft palate contains the neurovascular structures and many mucous glands that lubricate the oral cavity. The function of the soft palate is to aid swallowing and breathing by altering the patency of the respiratory and digestive tracts respectively. Furthermore, the soft palate plays an important role in speech as it enables the pronunciation of velar consonants together with the tongue. Next is the pharynx. The pharynx, or the plural of pharynges, is the part of the throat behind the mouth and nasal cavity, and above the esophagus and larynx, the tubes going down to the stomach and the lungs. It is found in vertebrates and invertebrates, though its structure varies across species. So we have three here: the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. The first one is the nasopharynx. The nasopharynx extends from the base of the skull to the upper surface of the soft palate above the oral cavity. The nasopharynx connects the nasal cavity with the throat. The nasopharynx connects to the eustachian tubes of the middle ear, which allows the nasopharynx to help balance pressure within the ear. Next is the oropharynx. The oropharynx serves both the respiratory and digestive systems. The oropharynx is the most critical region in swallowing and joins the oral cavity and nasopharynx with the larynx and hypopharynx. And lastly, the laryngopharynx, also referred to as hypopharynx. It is the most caudal portion of the pharynx and is a crucial connection point through which food, water, and air pass. Specifically, it refers to the point which the pharynx divides anteriorly into the larynx and posteriorly into the esophagus. Next is the larynx. The larynx, commonly called the voice box or glottis. It is the passageway for air between the pharynx above and the trachea below. It extends from the fourth to the sixth vertebral levels. The larynx is often divided into three sections: sublarynx, larynx, and the supralarynx. It is formed by the nine cartilages that are connected to each other by muscles and ligaments. The larynx plays an essential role in human speech. During sound production, the vocal cords close together and vibrate as air expelled from the lungs passes between them. The false vocal cords have no role in sound production, but help close off the larynx when food is swallowed. The thyroid cartilage is the Adam's apple. The epiglottis acts like a trap door to keep food and the other particles from entering the larynx. Let us now proceed to trachea. The trachea, commonly called the windpipe, is the main airway to the lungs. It divides into the right and left bronchi at the level of the fifth thoracic vertebra, channeling air to the right or left lung. The hyaline cartilage in the tracheal wall provides support and keeps the trachea from collapsing. The posterior soft tissue allows for expansion of the esophagus, which is immediately posterior to the trachea. The mucous membrane that lines the trachea is ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium similar to that in the nasal cavity and nasopharynx. Doublet cells produce mucus that traps airborne particles and microorganisms, and the cilia propel the mucus upward where it is either swallowed or expelled. Now, let's talk about esophagus. The esophagus is a tube that connects the throat and stomach. It is about 8 inches or 20 centimeters long. So esophagus helps also to breathe so that we can produce speech. Now let us talk about the nasal cavity. The nasal cavity is the inside of your nose. It is lined with a mucous membrane that helps keep your nose moist by making mucus so you won't get nosebleeds from a dry nose. There are also little hairs that help filter the air you breathe in, blocking dirt and dust from getting into your lungs, which may lead to difficulty in speech production. Finally, although there is practically nothing that we can do with the nose and the nasal cavity, they are a very important part of our equipment for making sounds, particularly nasal consonants such as M and N. Again, we cannot really describe the nose and the nasal cavity as articulators in the same sense as those that we have mentioned above. Nostrils. Nostril is the common name for the two anterior nares, the external openings in human nose that leads to the nasal cavity. They are the connection between air in the environment and the airways through the posterior or internal nares, the inner opening of the nasal cavity into the pharynx. The primary purpose of the external nares is to let air enter the nasal cavities so it can be purified and sent to the next part of the respiratory tract. It also allows different scents to enter the nose and reach the olfactory region of the nose. Next is lips. The lips serve for creating different sounds, mainly labial, bilabial, and labiodental consonant sounds, as well as vowel rounding, and thus are an important part of the speech apparatus. The lips enable whistling and the forming of wind instruments such as the trumpet, clarinet, flute, and saxophone. Next is tongue. The tongue is the most important articulator of speech. This muscle is extremely strong, as it must move food around in our mouths as we chew. Its other biological function is to push the food into a bolus and then push it down the esophagus to our stomach. Try swallowing to feel the strength of your tongue pushing down and back. Speech, on the other hand, requires a very different approach. For the sound to resonate effectively, the less tongue root tension, the better. For speech, you want to relax the tongue up and forward, the opposite of swallowing. The quick movements of the tongue necessary for rapid delivery of tongue twisters, for example, require very delicate control of the action of the tongue. This control is often best regulated in concert with the ear, listening to the sounds created by the voice when the tongue is in one position over another. Sensitivity is the key to learn to appropriate the range of capabilities the tongue possesses. Next is the teeth. So let us talk about the role of the teeth in speech. Speaking is the first and basic step of human communication. Some professions such as politics, acting, presenting, and singing are based on proper speech. Teeth have an important role in proper speech. Some examples below highlight this role of the teeth in sounding the letters. So the first one, the TH sound is produced when the tongue brushes against the upper row of teeth. Next is the forming of F and B sounds. The lower lip is actually pressed to the upper teeth to shape them. And lastly, producing S sounds. Producing S sounds is more complicated. The teeth trap the air and work with the tongue to form it. S, C, H, and J sounds come out in similar way, but only tongue does not have a role. Teeth, jaw bones, gums, tongue, and root of the mouth work all together to chew, taste, swallow, and spit. Next is the oral cavity. The human oral cavity refers to the mouth and all its parts, including the lips, tongue, teeth, and the roof and floor of the mouth. Primarily belonging to the digestive system, the oral cavity also plays an important role in respiration. Next is the jaw. The jaws are sometimes called articulators. Certainly, we move the lower jaw a lot in speaking. But the jaws are not articulators in the same way as the others because they cannot themselves make contact with other articulators. Next is lungs. The lungs are the primary organs of the respiratory system in humans and many other animals, including a few fish and some snails. In mammals and most other vertebrates, two lungs are located near the backbone on either side of the heart. And this is probably the most essential organ in producing the speech. Without this, one will not be able to produce oxygen and utter a word. Their function is in the respiratory system is to extract oxygen from the atmosphere and transfer it into the bloodstream. and to release carbon dioxide from the bloodstream into the atmosphere in a process of gas exchange. Last, in the organs or in the vocal organs responsible for the speech production is the diaphragm. So what is diaphragm? Diaphragm is the primary muscle used in respiration, which is the process of breathing. This dome-shaped muscle is located just below the lungs and heart. It contracts continually as you breathe in and out. So the speech production. Phonetics studies human speech. Speech is produced by bringing air from the lungs to the larynx, or what we call the respiration, where the vocal folds may be held open to allow the air to pass through or may vibrate to make a sound phonation. The air flow from the lungs is then shaped by the articulators in the mouth and nose, called articulation. Let us now talk about the parts of the brain responsible for language and speech. The Broca's area, motor control of mouth and lips, motor cortex, angular gyrus, Wernicke's area, primary auditory cortex. Let us talk about the Broca's area first. Broca's area or the Broca area is a region in the frontal lobe of the dominant hemisphere, usually the left of the brain, with functions linked with speech production. Language processing has been linked to Broca's area since Pierre Paul Broca reported impairments in 2 patients. They had lost the ability to speak after injury to the posterior inferior frontal gyrus of the brain. Since then, the approximate region he identified has become known as Broca's area, and the deficit in language production as Broca's aphasia, or also called expressive aphasia. Studies of chronic aphasia have implicated an essential role of Broca's area in various speech and language functions. Further, fMRI studies have also identified activation patterns in Broca's area associated with various language tasks. However, slow destruction of the Broca's area by brain tumors can leave speech relatively intact, suggesting its functions can shift to nearby areas in the brain. Let us now talk about the Wernicke's area. Wernicke's area is the region of the brain that is important for language development. It is located in the temporal lobe on the left side of the brain and is responsible for the comprehension of speech, while Broca's area is related to the production of speech. Again, Wernicke's area is responsible for the comprehension of the speech, while Broca's area is for the production of speech. Language development or usage can be seriously impaired by damage to Wernicke's area of the brain. When this area of the brain is damaged, a disorder known as a Wernicke's aphasia can result, with the person being able to speak in phrases that sound fluent yet lack meaning. While the location of Wernicke's area is sometimes displayed visually as being in the left cerebral hemisphere near a large groove known as the lateral sulcus, the exact location of this region is still debated. So again, Wernicke's aphasia is associated in the part of Wernicke's area. Early neuroscientists were interested in discovering where certain abilities were localized in the brain. The localization of brain function suggests that certain abilities, such as producing and understanding language, are controlled by certain parts of the brain. One of the pioneers of this research was a French neurologist named Paul Broca. During the early 1870s, Paul Broca discovered a region of the brain associated with the production of spoken language. So that is again the Broca's area. He found that damage to this area resulted in problems producing language. Now, the motor cortex. The motor cortex is the region of the cerebral cortex involved in planning, control, and execution of voluntary movements. Classically, the motor cortex is an area of the frontal lobe located in the posterior presental gyrus immediately anterior to the central sulcus. So here are the movements controlled by the motor cortex. Lips, jaw, and tongue, which are the necessary parts of the body in the production of speech, are also included. Next is the angular gyrus. The angular gyrus is a region of the brain in the parietal lobe that lies near the superior edge of the temporal lobe and immediately posterior to the supramarginal gyrus. It is involved in a number of processes related to language, number processing, spatial cognition, memory retrieval, attention, and theory of mind. That is Brodmann Area 39 of the human brain. Next is the auditory cortex. The auditory cortex takes part in the spectrotemporal meaning involving time and frequency analysis of the inputs passed on from the ear. The auditory cortex's function may help explain why particular brain damage leads to particular outcomes. For example, unilateral destruction in a region of the auditory pathway above the cochlear nucleus results in a slight hearing loss, whereas bilateral destruction results in a cortical deafness. The cortex then filters and passes on the information to the dual stream of speech processing. So those are the parts of the vocal organ and brain responsible for the language and production of speech. Without all this, we may be deaf and mute. Every single part is very vital in the production of speech. If one will be damaged, the whole speech production process might be affected even in a very little way. That is the physiology of speech. Thank you and have a great day.